All right. Welcome, everybody. The Duran live chat number 24. Can you guys hear me out there? How's everyone doing this Monday? Let us know from where you're listening. It's great to have you here. Good morning from soggy Los Angeles. All right. From LA.
Good evening from soggy Moscow.
Good evening from Pensa, Russia. Good afternoon from Ireland. Wisconsin, Sydney, Australia, Saxony, Germany. All right. Hello from Glasgow, Wiltshire, England, Madison, Wisconsin. All right. Cool. California, Ensenada, Mexico, Edinburgh, Scotland, Central Valley, California. All right. Welcome, everybody from the Netherlands, from Ireland, from Australia, from Birmingham, UK. Hello, Tweety Bird. How are you? Good to have you here. From Serbia. Hello, Dragan. Richard from Bangkok. Hello, Richard. And hello, Larry from Phoenix. All right, let's get going. Texas, Florida, Quebec, Longview, Texas. All right, we have in Moscow, the one, the only, Mr. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk, of course. Hello, Peter. How are you in soggy Moscow? How are things going?
I stayed home most of the day because it's like walking through a swamp, okay? It's 1 degree above zero. There's a lot of snow out there, and that means a lot of sludge.
All right. Hello, Liam from Virginia, Patricia from Berkshire, Todd from Sweden, from Toronto, Canada, from Britain, WhoFan78. All right. Yes, Tweety Bird, Oracle of Moscow. Peter, Oracle of Moscow. All right. And of course, with that lead-in, we have in London, the one, the only, the Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. Hello, Alexander. How are you doing in London?
Look at that royal weed.
The royal weed, yeah. By our standards, it's been cold here. We've had several days of sub-zero temperatures. Nobody in Moscow would take it very seriously.
No.
All right. We're in a good mood today. Okay. How's everyone doing out there? Thank you for joining us for this live chat 24. Let's get started with some of the questions we have before the live chat that were sent in. And let's begin with a question to Peter from Asthma. Peter, this has to do with the INF.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the Russia announcement to withdraw from INF. To what extent Russia will retaliate? Is it going to deploy missiles in Venezuela or maybe Cuba, for example? And for the EU, are we going to see more sanctions on Russia, weaken Russia's economy? I know Alexander probably is going to want to jump in on that as well because he sent out some news about the Russian economy. So, Peter, take it away.
I don't think in Europe there's much of an appetite for additional sanctions, okay? We have to remember that the sanctions that are being applied against Russia are voted on every 6 months. And Alexander Mercouris and I have noticed that there's a trend developing. They don't say unanimous anymore. There's a consensus, which means the stronger powers within the European Union essentially put pressure on other countries, like, for example, Austria or Hungary or Italy, that really have had enough of these sanctions. So I don't see additional sanctions. Will Russia deploy under Russian control weaponry into Venezuela? I don't think so. Russia has the ability to project military power about 1,500 kilometers from its border, meaning Syria is the limit. And as far as I know, the Venezuelan government has not requested for any kind of assistance. Would there be some types of military hardware where the Venezuelans might be interested in purchasing? I think absolutely that would be within the realm of possibilities. But as far as I know, and I probably wouldn't know because it probably wouldn't be made public, something like that happening. Russia is declared that it's leaving the INF only because the United States has said that it will do so. And there's history here. When George W. Bush withdrew from the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002, Putin was in power and he said there will be consequences. And you know what? The consequences are coming about. Now, let's be very clear here. There were members of the Russian military that didn't like the INF either, okay, because it put a crimp on their technological developments. So there's a certainly circles here in Moscow that are say fine. I mean, the Americans are putting in anti-ballistic missile systems already in Eastern Europe. They say they're there for Iran, but we know the truth. They're all directed against Russia. So the Russian military is taking the cue. Well, you don't want to parlay. We can play this game too. And you know who the biggest losers are? Europe. Remember, Alexander Makiris and I are old enough to remember the whole debate about the INF in 1987. Okay, the reason why it was signed in the first place. So this all has to do with John Bolton wanting to be the unilateralist, does not like any treaties. He doesn't want any impediments to American power. But 1987 and 2019 are very, very different. Russia, the Soviet Union existed then, Russia exists now. And Russia has been very, very careful with its defense expenditures, a tenth of what it is of the collective NATO powers. And it is primarily directed towards defense. All right. So, and that's exactly what it's achieved. And I think it was a year ago now, the Russians demonstrated their defensive capabilities and really spooked a lot of people, at least publicly, in the American intelligence defense swamp. That the U.S. has been fighting the wrong wars all along. These regime changes, Russia hasn't been doing that. It's been developing systems to defend its own sovereignty, and this is what we get. The takeaway from all of this is very bad news, because the new START treaty expires in 2021, and there seems to be no reason to believe whatsoever that there'll be another one. So it'll be in 2021 will be the first time in the post-Cold War era that we have no arms control agreements for these type of weaponry. It's awful. We are not 2 minutes away from 12. We are like 15 seconds away from 12, and this was all done unilaterally by one party and one party only. So you can drop it on into the lap of Donald Trump, the current president of the United States, and his horrifically aggressive, mindlessly aggressive foreign policy team.
All right, Alexander, before you jump in on the INF, there's another question related to the INF from MG. Any possibility of multilateral agreements to include other countries after the US and Russia both suspend the INF?
Right. Well, there may be going down the line, but I have to say, I think that's extremely unlikely. And of course, the great difficulty is that bilateral treaties between Russia and the United States are now difficult enough. Introducing third countries, and of course, what people are talking about, I think, is China here, is going to be extremely difficult because, of course, the Chinese have their own security issues with the US. How do you balance that out? Also, which countries? I can see that the US would be very keen on bringing in China, but would it agree to bring in, say, Britain or France or Israel or India or any of these other countries? I don't realistically see it. I mean, the INF treaty is a bilateral treaty between the United States and Russia. It worked quite well. It suited both countries, and it was part of the arms control architecture. I have to say, I agree with Peter. I think that the US leaving the treaty is very much part of John Bolton's underlying agenda, which is to tear up all arms control entirely. He's never liked arms control. This is the agenda he's following. I think it's very bad. I think that if there had been a real wish to extend the treaty to include third country powers, there was no reason that couldn't have been done whilst the treaty was already and still in place. Now, just to come back to those questions that were asked earlier, firstly, I think there is no possibility of Russia installing intermediate nuclear force treaty weapons in either Cuba or Venezuela. That just isn't going to happen. I mean, the Russians have already made very clear what their counter is going to be. They're going to develop weapon systems which will balance out the US in Europe, but they're not going to start expanding this thing and escalating in that kind of way, which would create an international crisis of an entirely different order of magnitude, and which is not in their interests. Secondly, as for sanctions, all I would say about the sanctions is this. We've had some more economic data from Russia. It turns out that economic growth in 2018 exceeded everyone's expectations, including the Russians' own. They have achieved solid economic growth of 2.3% of GDP, despite having massively deleveraged, paid off lots and lots of debt, and kept interest rates, real interest rates, at around 4 to 5%, as opposed to, say, the US, where interest rates, real interest rates, that's interest rates above inflation, are almost zero. So there is no conceivable rationale in doubling down on those sanctions. And I think, as Peter absolutely rightly says, there is no appetite in Europe for more of those sanctions. The US did try further sanctions in 2018. It tried to sanction the Russian aluminium company Rusal, and that backfired spectacularly. And they've now had to lift those sanctions. And in August, they announced a round of sanctions relating to the Skripal, connected supposedly to the Skripal incident. They'd said there'd be further sanctions in November, and those sanctions didn't happen. The reason those sanctions are not happening is because the impact of sanctions now increasingly affects Western economies and is decreasingly affecting Russia's. We see that it is decreasingly affecting it because, as I said, Russian economic growth is getting stronger.
Also, just maybe to end on this here, is that a INF treaty that would have more than two parties, Russia and the United States. Well, China's been mentioned here. Well, why would the Chinese do that, logically speaking? I mean, the Trump administration is so unreliable when it comes to treaties. And so the Chinese say, you want us to go down the path of months and months of negotiations, and then your predecessor, or if in the unlikelihood that Trump gets a second term, he would walk away from that too. I mean, why go through the effort when your interlocutor is is a party that is not trustworthy? Okay, look what the U.S. is doing to the dollar. I mean, there are countries around the world that are interested in de-dollarization because the U.S. is using the dollar as a weapon. It's supposed to be a means of exchange. That has been the hallmark of American hegemony is the dollar, not its military. And now it callously uses the dollar as a weapon. And I know we're going to be talking about Venezuela later. So it gets down to the trust of your entrusting your interlocutor. And it's just not here right now. It just doesn't exist.
All right, Valley, thank you for your super chat. Thank you very much. Hello, Pam. Good to have you on board here as well. Peter, how close is Ukraine to joining NATO? A question from Asma.
Look, it's kind of a formality at this point here because de facto Ukraine already is a member of NATO. It behaves that way and it's treated that way by other NATO members for the most part. But I don't see the Germans or the Italians, even the French, the Spaniards saying, that is just a needless provocation. The sanctions are enough. We're not going to go any further than this. And the democratic credentials of Ukraine are obviously in question. And by NATO's own rules, it cannot include a country that has territorial disputes with its neighbor. And according to Ukraine, they have territorial disputes with Russia. So it's possible under some circumstances, but primarily, and I want to underline this again, NATO would have to break its own rules, okay? And that's not, that is within the realm of possibilities, considering what I just said a minute ago, all right? But at this point, I don't think that's a likelihood. Obviously, Poroshenko and his regime desperately want to become part of European institutions, but I don't see that happening right now. There are too many powerful elements, particularly in the German economy, that just say, no way. We don't trust these guys. They bring no value whatsoever. As a matter of fact, they create risk. We're not interested in it, okay? That's where we are right now as we speak in 2019.
All right, Alexander, another question from MG. How true is the story of Russia building a nuclear power plant in North Korea And if it's true, what does this mean for the talks between North and South Korea?
Right. The Russians have categorically denied that story. They say there is no truth to it whatsoever. They say that it is fake news. And I mean, this has been confirmed by the Russian embassy in Pyongyang, and it's been confirmed by the foreign ministry. They say that the problem with building a nuclear plant in North Korea, quite apart from the fact that I suspect it would be a contrary to the sanctions, is that North Korea's infrastructure is simply not ready to cope with a plant like that. So it isn't going to happen. There's no such plan. One should be extremely careful of stories like this that the media spreads. And I'm absolutely certain of this. There will not be any Russian nuclear plants in North Korea unless and until there is some sort of general consensus moving forward with the nuclear issue in North Korea. That may not be in the negotiations between the United States and North Korea, which seem to be, despite the summit that's coming up between Trump and Kim, in deadlock. But it could be as a result of the evolving negotiations between the North and South Korea. But as I said, until there's some real movement there, with the economic situation and picture there, I think we can put this idea of nuclear plants, Russian nuclear plants in North Korea to sleep. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, but just to echo what Alexander Mercouris said, I think at the end process of this peace initiative, primarily the interstate initiative, that could very, very much be on the table as the result of an agreement being signed between the two Koreas. Additionally, with the United States. But like we've said in previous podcasts, it's the U.S. that is the impediment to bringing peace to the Korean Peninsula, not North Korea.
Yes.
All right. One more question before we shift over to the chat and get moving on some of the topics. Of course, Venezuela, IMF, Yellow Vest, Syria. We got a lot to talk about. Peter, let's switch over to the U.S. A question from Alan. What if the Dems' so-called left turn is really their strategy for 2020 to set up their base to welcome a moderate candidate whom they have already pre-selected?
That's an interesting question. I'm gonna. My immediate answer is: you assume the Democrats have too much intelligence. Okay, no, because it's really interesting here. I mean, Ocasio-Cortez, she's fascinating because it's really the right wing media that's brought her into the spotlight. And so and what's happening is that, look at the issue of ICE during the midterm elections. And up until the new Congress was voted in, that was a really very specific issue that some people very much on the left talked about. Now it's become mainstream. So what happens is that they pick their darling. I got no gripe with her. I think she's kind of silly. She's got a lot of initiative, and good for her. And she's in a safe district. She could be Speaker of the House one day if she sticks around long enough. But it's people like that are given so much spotlight that it's pulling the entire party to the left. So you don't really need a master plan. And if you move it so far to the left, I mean, at birth abortions, I mean, seriously, I mean, it is getting scary. The leadership won't have any choice but to follow the base. And then you're going to have that, again, a repeat of 2016 against, truly red states and the archipelago blue states on the coast, and it will get very nasty. But I mean, if you have this Virginia governor, saying, you could, after birth, you make the infant comfortable, and then you have a discussion what to do. Basically premeditated murder, okay? And if that's what part of the base of the Democratic Party believes, well, that's just a third rail for the deplorables. It ain't going to happen. So there's a lot of politics. Presidential sweepstakes. It's a full-time avocation. Okay, but we'll see. One thing I would answer is that I definitely see a strong move to the left, and of course that's the prerogative of citizens. But can you get elected on it? That's the 800-pound gorilla in the corner that we're going to be talking about until November of 2020, for sure.
Yeah, fast approaching. 2020 is fast approaching. Alexander, we have a super chat from Clark. What views on Prime Minister Modi of India versus Congress Rahul Gandhi? Is the Gandhi family corrupt?
Well, I think that the Gandhi family, their extraordinary political longevity in India, and we should say, make it clear, it's the Nehru Gandhi family, because the founder of it was Jawaharlal Nehru, Pandit Nehru, who was the first prime minister of independent India after independence. Indira Gandhi was his daughter. And of course, since then, we've had various Gandhis. We've had a son, who became Prime Minister of India, Rajiv Gandhi, in the 80s. And then there's Sonia Gandhi, who's Rajiv's wife, who's also been an important figure in Indian politics. I have to say that nepotism on that scale, where one of India's most important political parties, indeed the political party which led India to independence, is structured and organized around one family, well, putting aside whether these people are themselves individually corrupt or not, I think it is a profoundly bad thing. And I would add that it is inevitably going to lead, if not just to allegations of corruption, but it's going to create conditions, a climate for corruption, when one family, in what is supposed to be a democracy, is treated in this exceptionally privileged way. Now, having said all of that, I think there are clear problems with Prime Minister Modi and his government. He came to power in 2014, making multiple promises about how he was going to transform the Indian economy. There was going to be stellar growth. There were going to be millions of jobs made. India was going to achieve an economic breakthrough. That hasn't really happened. His economic management has been, in many ways, very badly flawed. There was a disastrous demonetization experiment that he carried out some years ago, when quite arbitrarily and without giving anybody any proper notice, he withdrew most of the country's banknotes from circulation. And I think that what we are seeing also is growing concern about corruption within Prime Minister Modi's own party. So in India, corruption is a long-standing problem. It affects the entire political system. It affects the business community as well. I think we're probably going to see corruption used in the forthcoming elections in India, which are coming. I suspect that the election will in the end revolve around economic issues, as it usually does in most countries. Modi looks vulnerable on that front. And despite all that I said about my concerns about the Nehru-Gandhi family and its position in Indian political life, I would not be at all surprised if we see a swing back towards Congress. Whether it will be enough to unseat Modi and will lead to a Congress victory, I don't know. But I think, that's certainly looking like a possibility now. And local elections, which happened in India a few months ago, rather point in that direction.
Maybe just a slightly counterbalance comment on all this is that the Gandhi family is very much part of the fabric of the political culture of India. And I understand, and I'm agreeing with Alexander Mercouris, I can understand how people would be motivated to be politically active, because they're the Kennedys and the Roosevelts and the Clintons all wrapped into one. Okay, so I mean there is a certain appeal there, but I think Alexander Mercouris's points hold a lot of logic.
All right, Robert Lawrence, wish these guys had a show on the BBC. Would you want a show on the BBC, Peter?
Oh, hey, if I could charge their license, yeah, I'd do it, okay, because nobody in Britain wants to watch the BBC. They don't want to pay their licenses, but they'd pay a license to watch us.
How about you, Alexander?
Well, I wouldn't mind being on the BBC sometimes, just to put an alternative view. The point is, they won't have me. I mean, there's no ghost of a chance that it's going to happen, at least anytime soon. I mean, one should be realistic about this. I mean, the only circumstance where they would have any of us on the BBC, it would be in a situation where it was so tilted against us as to make it very, very difficult for us to put
A
our
hit
points
piece.
across. No.
No, well, having said that, I had a guest on last week on Crosstalk. It was about Venezuela, and he just this presenter was just flat-footed. I mean, because he had facts, okay, and she quickly wound up the segment. Our mutual friend Marcus Papadopoulos, he was on recently and did exactly the same thing. And the presenter takes their papers. Well, we're going to go to a commercial right now in the segment. Okay, so. But that's how they prove. We have alternative voices, but they're very, very uncomfortable with them.
Yeah, I think I'm very comfortable with what we're doing now. Actually, if I have to be frank about it.
Okay, then buy a T-shirt. Okay,
there you go. And with that said, guys, go to the Durant Shop, buy a T-shirt. That really, really helps us out a lot. You can donate to us on PayPal and Patreon. Send us your super chats as well. We'll try to answer that. We will answer those super chats, and we'll try to answer all the questions that you guys put up on the chat. And remember, guys, share this channel, hit that like button right now. Let's get the people on this live chat to hear what we're saying and to join in. And let's move, Peter, now you mentioned Venezuela, so let's move to the big story, which is Venezuela. Juan Guaido, Peter, is courting China. Will he succeed?
I doubt it. He has no standing. His legitimacy is vacuous, all right? Just because Mike Pence says he's interim president doesn't mean squat. It doesn't have anything to do with international law or contracts or agreements. The Chinese would be foolish. I mean, would they sit down with them and kind of, smoke him out, see what he's up to? Of course they would. Would they switch their? Would they? I don't even think they legally could do that. I mean, they would say no. I mean, the way we understand the political process of Venezuela, he is obviously a rogue element. I mean, the Venezuelan constitution was grossly violated on a number of points. I suggest everyone go to the RT website. John Laughlin, a good friend of ours, has written a brilliant piece on the illegality of this coup that has been orchestrated from abroad. So the Chinese would I could not under any circumstances change their position right now as we speak. But of course, regime change is taking place there. Alex Christofor and I did a video on this. Basically, we are in the shock and awe phase of this. This is all to control the narrative. They do not use facts. They do not educate Western audiences whatsoever. Venezuela is a very complicated country, and it's experiencing some very serious problems. Many of those problems are engineered against it from the outside. The U.S. Treasury Department is the greatest enemy of Venezuela right now, okay? Not the U.S. military, the Treasury Department, which is vastly surpassing the Pentagon and as a weapon against foes that the United States does not like. So we're going to keep an eye on it here. China has the most to lose with this so-called interim president, which is an illegal regime. So they're, of course, watching this very, very carefully, and I have no indication whatsoever that they're going to change their position anytime soon.
All right, Alexander, I'm looking at the live chat, and Liam mentioned the word propaganda. I see a lot of people talking about Venezuelan propaganda. I'll be honest, I don't know what to believe about Venezuela as I read the stories. Sometimes I think Maduro's going to hold steady. Sometimes I think he's on the brink of just being ousted. What's going on, Alexander? Do you have a feel for what's really happening in Venezuela?
It's incredibly difficult because, of course, there is so little accurate reporting from the ground. I mean, I was looking at the Moon of Alabama the other day, and they were giving this report that the protests, that the pro-Guaido protest was around 80,000, 50 to 80,000 was his estimate. Another put it even lower at 20,000. Yeah. And then you go to The Guardian and you read the same protest, and they say that it was 1 million people. Well, I don't believe it was 1 million people or anything even remotely close to that. I think the one thing I'm going to say is this. So far, the political institutions in Venezuela that matter, the government, the bureaucracy, the diplomatic corps, and above all, the police and the military seem to be sticking by Maduro. They seem to be sticking by the man who is the legitimate, internationally recognized president of the country, who represents the country in international forums like the United Nations and elsewhere. So long as that remains the case, it seems to me that short of some sort of violent intervention in the country, either directly or by proxy wars, which I'm afraid we've seen lots of recently, it seems to me that Maduro will remain in place. It is possible, it is entirely possible that as the economic pressures on Venezuela intensify, we could see the solidity of these institutions start to crack. That hasn't happened yet, but that is the game that is being played now. I think we will know more clearly where this is going in about, say, 2 weeks to a month's time. If at the end of that period, Maduro is still there, no really important cracks have appeared in the, as I said, the political and institutional system that sustains him, then I think we could say that this attempt to basically leverage Guaido quickly into the position of president of Venezuela will have failed. And at that point, I'm afraid we will see it all going back to Washington and them deciding there what next they're going to do, whether that will be, as I said, an even further tightening of the screws, an economic embargo, or, and I have to say, I think this is very likely, an attempt to try and instigate some kind of insurgency there.
Yeah, what's happening right now is not only is there a open coup being performed by outside powers against Venezuela with willing participants within Venezuela, mostly from the fringe elements of the opposition. The opposition is very, very fractured in Venezuela. For all the talk of democracy, they do not participate in it. They have not participated for years now. They say they will. They make their demands, and then they walk away from it. Because the opposition wants to keep themselves like pure. They don't want to participate in the current political system. That's why they've come up with this pretender from the most extreme part of the opposition that over the last 2 years have performed a series of violence events, people being killed, buildings being burned down, people being burned. These are the people that Washington are supporting right now. There are many, and I think the time frame is really interesting because a month, 6 weeks, the way I look at it, because the opposition itself is not completely unified around this guy at all, okay? Because they say, number one, who are you? We paid our dues. You know, there's going to be a lot of things going on within the opposition too. But what's happening, you know, Bolton with his yellow pad, okay, that was his propaganda ploy, okay? Everything remains on the table. What's really happening is state destruction. This is what they wanted to do. This is what they tried to do to Assad. You know, all the bombing sorties that the United States committed fighting Al-Qaeda and 31 flavors of jihad. No, they were destroying the Syrian state so it could not function. And then when the state collapses, then you have regime change. So, and the same thing applied to Libya, okay? They want destruction of the state. And the destruction of the state allows a political fact to be created on the ground. This is what they're doing to Venezuela. But Venezuela's economy is much, much bigger. The resources are vast, and people are going to fight for them, and people will die for them, okay? This government isn't going anywhere. And expect and number two, with these opposition people, do you think they're going to go for amnesty and forgiveness? No, they're not. That's not these kind of. They're not Democrats with a small d. These are neoliberals. Okay, they want to privatize everything and stuff the money in their pockets in their Western backers. That's what they're expected to do if they grab power. Okay, John Bolton has already telegraphed that on Fox News. All right, it's very, very clear. So. There's not really a way out here. I mean, I do not see under any circumstances and there's no good reason why the Maduro government is just going to say, raise up their hands and, you know, and fly out to, you know, who knows, Grenada or something like that. No. Okay. This is going to be a very, very risky game. But the state and the government have resources, as we've already pointed out. The military is staying loyal. The police are staying loyal. And it's really going to be like destroying the Swiss system, disrupting oil markets. Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo and John Bolton think the Saudis are going to help them out. Well, the Saudis got screwed last year by the Americans. Okay, do you think they're going to trust them this time? Just trust us this time, okay? No. They already realized these guys in the White House, they will flip at a moment's notice, and they do not keep their word. So this will have a ripple effect, and we're going to see if the U.S. thinks they can contain it. And you know what? They never do. My last point, it's a very dangerous time, okay? Because the U.S. are backing elements that do not care about their own people, do not care about democracy, do not participate in elections. And when election that they didn't participate, they didn't win, get your head around that, they say it was corrupt, okay? It was illegitimate. So the U.S. has picked the most fringe group, but they always do. Look what they did in Serbia, okay? They did exactly the same thing. This is regime play a la Venezuela, okay? But it's basically recognizable across a whole array of countries we've seen over the last 20 years.
Alexander Peter said that the U.S. is destroying their own institutions that they helped build. We already saw, and we saw it firsthand with the gold reserves in the UK. They've undermined the trust in the gold reserves by not giving Venezuela's gold to the Venezuelan government, as a matter of fact. So address that, Alexander, you being in the UK, and what's going on there, the Bank of England. But also there's a super chat, which you can also address as well, Alexander. And it's from Penguins fan, who says, Italy vetoed EU on Venezuela opposition leader. What do you think of this?
Yes, I think that's actually quite important, because can I just say something? I mean, of course, a lot of European countries have now recognized Guaido, Germany, Britain, Spain, and France. But the EU as an institution has not. And that has happened because of the Italian veto. We've been seeing that the Italians have been increasingly edging towards, under this new government that they elected last summer, into an anti-globalist, anti-neoliberal, anti-interventionist position. This is in some ways the strongest action they've taken on this so far. They have gone directly up against the German-French axis, which has attempted up to this point to control, and has successfully controlled, EU foreign policy. And if I can just take you back to a comment that Peter made a little while ago, at the start of this program, where we were talking about the sanctions against Russia and how the EU has now gone from saying that there's a unanimity about sanctions to there being a consensus about sanctions. When they talk about consensus instead of unanimity, it shows that there are some people within the EU who are now talking out against sanctions against Russia. I'm pretty sure that's Italy and the other countries which support Italy, but this is the first time that the Italians have gone even further and they've actually imposed a veto. So in a sense that this is a basic action against the French-German axis, which dominates the EU, the first concerted attack on it, I think that is a very big step. Now, can I come back to the question of the gold, because I think this is absolutely vital to understand.
Outrageous.
Well, first of all, it is outrageous. It's like a bank basically stealing your money. I mean, that's easy. That is in fact what it is. I mean, this is Venezuela's gold. It's not Britain's gold. They have breached trust in a grotesque way like this. Apparently, they're not even answering phone calls now from the Venezuelans when they phone up to ask what's happened to their gold. The staffers at the Bank of England have been told not to respond to them. It's what we have unfortunately seen with other places. It happened with Gaddafi's, with this Libya's sovereign wealth fund, which has also mysteriously disappeared, and we've discovered that funds from that have now been pilfered, and it undermines that thing without which no financial system can in the end work, which is trust. If trust is not there, it cannot function anymore. And a lot of people around the world, Turkey being a good example, I think the Turks are looking at this very carefully, but other countries also are going to say to themselves, why we should not have gold in Britain and the United States, and perhaps in any European country, because if we keep our gold there, who knows, somebody may take it. Yeah. There's a very interesting article which he provided a link to on the Duran by Michael Hudson, who is the US economist, in which he discusses at length the disintegration of trust in the international system as a result of the attacks upon it by the United States and by its allies, including in this case Britain, who are abusing the control they have over that system and the trust that people have placed in them in order to pursue geopolitical objectives. And one example that Michael Hudson gave is how the Germans, who had been up to recently very content to leave their gold in the United States, have quietly been, well, not so quietly, in fact, they have taken out quietly. They have insisted on it being repatriated to Germany because they no longer have that confidence in the United States and in the security of the United States that they once did. Now, can I just say something? It is extraordinary how we have got here, because as a historian, I remember the story about how in the 1950s, the Russians had, of course, their gold in London. And that was during the 1956 episode, firstly the Suez Crisis, and then the Hungarian crisis that happened in parallel to it. The Russians debated with themselves whether they were going to leave the gold in London or transfer it to New York. And indeed, they did, in fact, shift some of it. But the point was, despite that crisis being so great, despite there being threats of nuclear weapons used, because they were during that time, despite that being the height of the Cold War, no attempt was made by anybody to seize anybody's gold reserves at that time. We have moved from that position where the British and the Americans understood that the whole system depended upon trust to a situation now when they are quite happy to abuse that trust. And as I said, more and more countries around the world are going to look at that. We've seen with Germany, I've talked about Turkey, I suspect before very long the big Far Eastern economies, India also, they will all start taking action to protect themselves from the abuse of the financial system by the United States and by its British ally, and we will see the pace of alternative systems accelerate. And I strongly recommend to people that they read that very brilliant article by Michael Hudson, which is linked to on our website.
You know, also it's very important. We've been talking about countries and their trust. It's going to companies as well, because you know, the swashbucklers over at the Treasury Department, who knows what they're going to come up with next, okay? So you not only states going to be looking for different ways of trade and different systems. We've talked, maybe we'll talk about it another time, this fledgling system that some of the Europeans are trying to develop to be able to continue their trading relationship with Iran. In a previous podcast, Alexander Mercouris talked about how problematic it is, and I agree with him. But I think there is definitely a move towards using different systems and different instruments, and even using different currencies. We do know that the Venezuelan government is, as we speak, trying to find ways to be able to trade in euros and stay away from the dollar, also using the Chinese currency. So again, the U.S., by using the dollar and its financial system as a weapon, undermines its trust and its ability to do what it wants to do. It's absolute madness. You know, future historians will say this is folly, absolute folly.
All right, Peter, I'm glad you mentioned Iran. We have a super chat from Yash Wenth, and it has to do with Venezuela and Iran. So we've mentioned Libya, Serbia, and we're talking a lot about Venezuela and regime change. And the question is, what's happening with Iran now? Is Iran next on Bolton's list of regime change targets? What's the economic and the political scene like? What is the prognosis for Iran?
Well, let me answer that maybe in a much more broader sense here. And I think Iran and Venezuela and Nicaragua, Cuba, we can all put them all kind of in the same basket, because people like John Bolton, we said earlier at the beginning of our podcast, his aversion to arms control agreements. Why? Because that limits the Americans and their ability to project power. But right now, running away from those arms control agreements, which I think is a grave, grave mistake, is it's signaling that the Boltons and the Pompeos and the Abrams and the always confused Nikki Haley's out there, the unipolar moment is collapsing, and it's picking up pace. It's getting faster and faster, and they know that. These people in the foreign policy swamp, they know that, and they believe they need to take action now against these potential foes out there that will not submit to American hegemony, must be dealt with now, using a wide array of instruments from the financial system to the military. I think the possibility of a American-led strike against Iran is very real, even though the generals in the Pentagon will say, whoa, there's a lot of laws of unintended consequences there. But this is ideological possession that's in play right now. Because it has nothing to do with the well-being of people. It is to be able to maintain the empire, because the return and rising China is a reality you cannot dismiss. The fact that Russia has the means and the capability and the will to maintain its sovereignty against all comers. And then you have another oil-rich country, Venezuela, that is not as well prepared to take on the empire. Then it's learning the hard way. I don't have my prognosis about what's the end result for Venezuela. The tea leaves are too blurry for me right now. It's still early days. But I think this is very global. And I think that's how the American political establishment, foreign policy, intelligence establishment sees this here. Nicaragua and Cuba are not in the headlines, but they are in play. They are in play. Okay? And I'm sure, they're dusting off the old Abrams, Frankenstein manual, how to destroy states and then, as a result, societies. And Abrams, the blood has still not dried on his hands from what he did in the 1980s, particularly in Honduras. Okay, remember, he lied. He was convicted. Okay, and he was pardoned. I remember the day very clearly. It was Christmas Day when George H. Bush pardoned him, and it was a holiday. No one was doing anything. Of course, it was before the internet and Twitter, and he got off scot-free. And 30 years later, he's been he has a resurrection to perform the same very deadly, deeply immoral moves. Okay, so I'm sorry I wasn't so specific about Iran, because I see it as one kind of global picture, a global scenario dealing with the unipolar moment coming to an end.
Yeah, everything is very blurry, Alexander. We have a super chat from Pat, who says that the U.S. is saying military in Venezuela is defecting left and right. What do you make of that, Alexander? Because it's we had I think it was the Air Force general that was on Twitter and made a video statement urging all the other armed forces to defect and go with Guaido.
One has to wonder when that was recorded. That last Christmas, and New Year's, and it was just filed away. Really, you have to take it all with a grain of salt. Jeez.
I mean, Peter's, I think, preempted what I was going to say. I mean, he's absolutely right. I mean, one general does not make the military. He was not, as I understand it, a general in command of troops. And I think that's an important point to make. He was a staff officer, and apparently he's now in Colombia. So one has to be very, very careful piecing together what is actually happening when we are in the middle of some kind of information campaign. So far, I have to say, I've not seen any real evidence of any significant defections from the Venezuelan military. One general, one attaché in Washington, who must have been put under intense pressure there, two Venezuelan soldiers who were probably not Venezuelan soldiers, actually, because they had the wrong patches on their uniforms. Unless there's something more going on that I don't know about, it doesn't seem to me as if there's any evidence that the Venezuelan military have cracked yet. I have no doubt that intense pressure is being put on them to do so. I suspect they're receiving messages, and the United States has ample ways of sending messages to military officers in Venezuela, telling them that it is in their own interests to do so, probably making threats, possibly offering inducements, and who knows, perhaps that may happen. But as of now, I haven't seen it.
Well, we have to believe it is happening because it's exactly what they did in Damascus, what they did in Tripoli. This is exactly what they do, and they've been doing it for a while. This has been planned for a long time. Remember, everyone, remarkably, on the second full day of the Trump presidency, the president of the United States wanted a briefing on what? Venezuela, of all countries.
Peter, a lot of people are asking, what is Russia up to in Venezuela? They've been kind of quiet. They have had some statements from the foreign ministry on what's going on, but in general, they haven't made too many statements. What do you think Russia is doing behind the scenes with Venezuela?
Well, I think, first of all, to reassure the legitimate government that they expect the legitimate government to stay in power and to honor their agreements. I mean, Russia has energy agreements. It has gold mining concessions there. It is very much vested in the Venezuelan government, and it's all above board. And I'm sure that there are elements of Russian intelligence that have read the forced regime change manual that is being dutifully recited in Washington and in some offices in Caracas, and I'm sure the Russians are giving them advice on what to expect, how to avoid it if possible, and what they need to do. So, I mean, the interesting thing is that, I mean, we are in a very small way here, but because of this practice of forced regime change, it's not just the people that do it, but we have the opportunity to observe how it's done and learn how each one is following a pattern and how certain deviations come about. But the Russian intelligence, for sure, has been watching very carefully how the United States does it and probably trying to give the best possible advice. Okay. I think it's been wise on Russia's part to be relatively quiet about this because it's already made its statement that it does not see this upstart as the legitimate president of Venezuela. It is against its current laws. And it's not up to countries to countries recognize countries. Countries don't recognize politicians. Okay, that's exactly what the United Nations position is, and they've already said that. Of course, the mainstream media didn't pound away at it because it's anyone that knows anything about international law would say, yeah, but they're right. So make sure you don't have that conversation on CNN. All right. So I think also Russia, because I think it does practice good statecraft, would probably be looking for a venue and parties to have some kind of mediation. That's Russia's first instinct, is to say, who can we get to talk? Because the Venezuelan government has said repeatedly, probably on a daily basis, we want to talk. Who can we talk to? I don't want to put words in their mouth. I wouldn't say with no preconditions. I think they'd probably say the only precondition is the law of the land, that unlike in the UK, unlike in Russia, unlike in the United States, the Constitution is a popular constitution. The people voted on the Constitution. In some ways, more democratic than most places in the world. So the precondition has to be the law. And I'm sure Russia would offer its good offices for talks and negotiations. But of course, with Elliott Abrams around, don't count on it.
All right. Thank you, KG, for mentioning to everyone to hit the like button. Yes, hit that like button, guys. Get the word out about the live chat and about the channel. Really appreciate your help. And help us get to 60,000 subscribers. Alexander, oh, Liam, by the way. Liam, yes, we are looking at the Matamoros strike in Mexico, and we are preparing a video on that as well. Alexander, we have a super chat on Europe from Afterglow. Spain has now joined Turkey in closing its borders to illegal migrants. Is this the beginning of the end for the EU's open borders policy?
I think it's been the beginning of the end for some time. I think that the moment really came when we saw back in the summer the interior minister of Germany made it very, very clear that he was prepared to take action to stop migrants moving into Germany through Europe. And even though that created a sort of mini crisis in Germany, and the interior minister, Mr. Seehofer, was supposed to have come out the worst for it, the fact of the matter is it was one of the things that led to the architect of that open border policy, Angela Merkel, having to announce her intention eventually to step down. So I think we have to accept the fact that this situation, which we have had in Europe for some time, where the European Union was not just operating an open border policy, but had got itself into a position in 2015 where it seemed to be even inviting people to come to Europe. I mean, that was what Angela Merkel essentially did. I think the reaction to that across Europe has been so strong, electorally speaking and politically speaking, that whole thing is disintegrating. And can I say, it's interesting that you mentioned Spain, because of course Spain has a left-wing government at the moment. I mean, it's a socialist government led by Mr. Sanchez, I believe his name is, but he's now rowing back on that. And I cannot help but think that one of the reasons that has happened is that there's been a very, very interesting swing against the socialists in the Spanish region of Andalusia, where we have seen an anti-EU, anti-open borders party, I think it's called Vox, taking a very strong lead, and where the socialists were trounced. And I think that even in Madrid, it seems, amongst the socialist government that is there now, I think the penny has dropped, and they understand that this is no longer sustainable.
Yep.
All right, Peter, we have a question from Gabarwala. Would you please discuss America being forced to, in parentheses, sign the terms of surrender for the Taliban? This is an interesting story with what's going on in Afghanistan and the negotiations with the Taliban. What do you think, Peter?
Well, I'm very angry with Donald Trump right now because of Venezuela. Okay, I'm very angry. However, and I'm going to do a program on this tomorrow on Crosstalk because it's fascinating, it's complicated. But I think that Trump, when he came into office, I guess he gave the Pentagon a 6-month assessment and get back to me on Afghanistan. Well, no change. Actually, it's getting worse. Look, the Taliban have made it. The Taliban of Afghanistan has never exported its struggle at all. It's always been within the borders of Afghanistan. And their demand is very clear. It's easy to understand. You don't even have to talk slow to understand it. No foreign occupation of Afghanistan. All right? And we will keep ISIS out. That's a good deal. And they're taking it. Now, of course, it's all about optics. Nobody wants to lose a war around my watch, all this nonsense, okay? But you hear all of the time in the mainstream media, and the Max Boots and people like that are this really a cancer on American foreign policy, with Abrams as well. It's going to be a deal that's going to be taken, I think. Now, it's a gift to Putin. No, it's not. No, it is not at all. It's Russia's neighborhood. Hello, everyone. What does that mean? It means the region, Pakistan, Russia, Iran, with the government in Afghanistan, they're going to have to manage their affairs in their region. It's the way it should have been all along. All right? This folly of being in Afghanistan for so long. And the Pentagon knows it. Now, of course, I saw, what was the name of what was this? War Machine? It was basically the, what was the, McChrystal. Okay, it's played by Brad Pitt. It's worth watching, actually. It's kind of a military comedy, if that's possible. But basically, it shows the futility of American foreign policy in Afghanistan. Of course, generals want to go there to get an extra star, okay, and their pension so they can get in the revolving door of the military-industrial complex. But, you know, Afghanistan is a dead letter, all right? And Trump knew it. And a lot of people know it, okay? What it did is with pouring more endless amounts of money. How many walls could have you built for that, okay? For all the money wasted in Afghanistan, okay? And the suffering of the Afghan people. We have to remember, you know, there was the Soviet experience and then the American one. This has been a 30-odd year war going on. It's time to leave, and it's going to happen. And the preconditions for the Taliban is you get out and we'll keep all other foreign fighters out. That's a good deal. Take it, and it will be taken.
So Peter, there's a question asking for some clarity on this. It's from Liam, actually, and he wants to know, does this really mean that troops will leave Afghanistan? Are the American troops going to leave Afghanistan in its entirety? Are they going to have some remnants there? What does it look like?
That remains to be seen. The fact of the matter is Trump has already said, you know, go down to 7,000. But think of the logic, folks. Once you start taking them out and you say it publicly, the rest come very, very quickly. Now, would there be some kind of intelligence attache, you know, to make sure the Taliban keeps their word or something like that? I could see that as conceivable. But what I think is really going to happen, there will be no high presence. It won't be an in-your-face occupation anymore. It will come to an end. So that's a very good question, and I think it's a detailed one, and I don't think anyone really can answer it with clarity. But the thing is, once you take out a few thousand, it'll have a ripple effect, and the rest will come with them relatively quickly.
All right, Alexander, switching from Afghanistan to Syria, the other country that Trump said he's pulling out troops. We have a super chat from Penguins who would like an update on Idlib in Syria. What's going on there? Is Trump really pulling out? Has he started any of the troop pullout from Syria? And what's the situation in Idlib? Is it a frozen area, the DMZ there?
Right. Well, first of all, on the question of the pullout, I mean, we're getting all kinds of mixed signals at the moment. The very latest story, which I think is based on a misreading of an interview that Donald Trump gave, in which he said that the United States will make sure that Israel is protected. I think a lot of people think that this means that he's now gone back on the pullout from Syria. I think he's still intent on pulling out from Syria. I think that there is a huge attempt to try and slow that down as much as possible by the military and the people that Peter was talking about, Max Boot, Crystal, all these other dreadful people who seem to be populate the media in the United States and who are so influential, and also by some people in the Pentagon and the State Department and the CIA. But I think eventually all of these troops will pull out. And I think they will pull out first and foremost, and I suspect I've heard that to some extent they already are, from the Kurdish areas, which are in the northeast of Syria.
Going to Jordan. Yeah,
exactly. There is some talk that the United States might try to cling on to this outpost that it has further south on the border with Jordan, in a place called Al-Tanf, because it's trying to use that to complicate communications between Iran and Syria across Iraq.
It's so silly. It's so silly.
Peter's so absolutely right. I mean, it's just unsustainable. I think the idea of, the sort of Beau Geste Foreign Legion people, a bunch of Marines holding out in some encampment in the middle of the Syrian desert in a place called Al-Tanf, it's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. So I think this is going to take place. It's going to take place probably more slowly than some of us would like, but I think it's going to take place. Now, Idlib is different because there are no American troops visibly there. I'm sure there are all kinds of intelligence people there, but not overtly there. What has happened in Idlib province is that it has essentially been taken over by Al-Qaeda. I mean, the Turks promised the Russians that wouldn't happen. It has happened. Al-Qaeda, through its local proxies, has managed to basically roll up all the other jihadi groups and is now securely in control of Idlib province, or rather that part of Idlib province that is still not fully under the control of the Syrian authorities, which is the majority part of Idlib province. That is unacceptable to the Russians. There have been complicated negotiations between the Russians and the Turks about this. Putin met Erdogan on the 23rd of January in Moscow. There is now confirmation that they're going to be meeting again very soon, in a couple of days, in Sochi, in Russia. I think the Russians will be making it very clear to Erdogan that if he can't sort out the mess in Idlib, then sooner rather than later, the Syrian military will have to go in there to do it for him. And they will be trying to get Erdogan to agree to that. There may be some sort of negotiation underway whereby Erdogan gets something in return, maybe some kind of zone of protection in the Kurdish areas. Who knows? I'm not going to try and speculate, but I think in any negotiation between Putin and Erdogan and between Russia and Turkey, it is Putin and the Russians who eventually and invariably come out on top because they are the stronger party. So I predict, I've been predicting this from the start of the year. From the start of this year, I predict that by the end of the year, we will see the Syrian army fully in control of Idlib province. Again, all these horrible Al-Qaeda people who are there, driven out, who knows to where. And I suspect
that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the problem is for Erdogan is that he's allowed this enclave in Idlib to become ISIS. Okay, he gave them a place to go. Yeah. Now the problem is that where do they go from Idlib? Okay, and it's Erdogan's nightmare. Okay,
yes,
because he coddled them, protected them, and as Alexander Makiris has said, is that it's going to be resolved. Now, Mr. Turkish president, what are you going to do with these people? Yeah. They're essentially yours. And
well, do they go to Turkey, Peter?
Well, no.
Or do they go to Europe?
That's his nightmare. Yeah. That's his nightmare. Do you think someone that has been trained, paid, and salaried, and then all this, the boss says, well, there's no more money, and you think, well, heck, 100 kilometers up north, I'll get my revenge for cutting me loose. Okay, I mean, Erdogan created this nightmare for himself.
Yes.
All right, because he used it as a piece on the chessboard, but it's toxic, and everyone knows it's toxic.
Yes.
And he is part of the problem. And the Russians and the Syrians are saying, "You figure it out, because we're coming."
Yes.
You figure it out.
Peter put it very well. I mean, that is the big problem, and that's the headache that Erdogan has created for himself. As I said, he got into bed with Al Qaeda, and now he's facing the consequences of all of that. Very, very uncomfortable for him. It is very, very difficult for Turkey. It is, and of course, Turkey has experienced quite a lot of Islamist terrorism recently, mostly by ISIS. But of course, Al Qaeda is perfectly capable of doing the same thing. So he's going to have lots of problems. When he faces them, he's going to have to turn to the Russians. It'll be the Russians.
Well, I mean, there's an obvious scenario, though it's something that Erdogan probably keeps in his back pocket, is use the Turkish military to allow the Syrian forces to destroy those terrorists in Idlib. But it would be very, very bloody. It would be a real catastrophe. But instead of trying to re-educate them and reintegrate them and hope they won't turn on you, you destroy them. It's a very cold, sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, we're over an hour now into this live chat. Guys, click on that like button, smash that like button, share the channel with everybody you know. Go to the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, buy a shirt, and help support us. And you can also donate to us on PayPal and Patreon. The links are in the description box. Send us your super chats as well, and we will answer the super chats, and we'll try to answer all the questions you have on the live chat as well. I am monitoring what everyone is saying, and I'm trying to get to everyone's questions, and we really appreciate those questions as well. Alexander, let's shift gears and go to Act 12 of the Yellow Vests. We did a video on this, and I posted it this morning. What is going on with the Yellow Vests? What's going on with Macron as well? One bike sell says good T-shirts. Yes, they are good T-shirts. Thank you for purchasing them. One bike sale. Thank you very much. Alexander, what's the situation in France?
I think it's continuing to be very bad. I mean, it's the most underreported story, I think, almost in the world. But once again, we had protests in France this weekend. The French economy, which is probably already in recession, is now clearly suffering further. The protest movement is not going away. The red scarves thing that was being put together, we've done a video on this, and that seems to have fizzled out and achieved almost nothing. And it seems to me that there is a real problem in France. And I think we're probably going to see, if this goes on for very much longer, remember it's the winter now, where temperatures have been cold. But if France goes into deeper recession and temperatures start to get warmer, well, spring is a time when all kinds of things tend to happen in France, spring and summer. The May events in France in 1968 obviously happened in May. The storming of the Bastille in 1789 happened in July. So winter is usually a quiet time. Spring and summer are hotter times and more passionate times. So I think that we could very well be seeing a slow escalation of this thing as the sort of winter months pass away, because there doesn't seem to be any end to it, and there doesn't seem to be anything that Macron and his people seem to know how to do to bring this thing under control. I think, if I have to say, I think if Macron really wants to get on top of this thing, he has to not only change his whole direction of his policies, but I think we would have to see a fundamental reconstruction of the French government. I think we would have to see Monsieur Philippe, who is the prime minister. I think you'd probably have to see him go. I think we'd have to see new people brought in. I think this new government would have to announce a radical change of direction, and I think that would leave Mr. Macron looking much less powerful than he has been up to now. He is resisting that. He's pressing ahead with his policies. The protests are continuing. And as I said, the risk is that by allowing that to happen in the spring and summer, he faces a real prospect that these protests could grow and grow very much.
The problem here is that Macron, through his arrogance and hubris, does not recognize the legitimate complaints of vast parts of the population. No, he's blaming Russia, he's blaming everybody, but he won't blame himself. And that is such an insult to the French electorate, okay? An insult. And he still hasn't got his head around that, okay? That he just, in his very genetic code, he is superior to the people that voted for him, okay? And that's his arrogance, and that is going to be his downfall. I mean, getting rid of the French president is very hard under their constitution because it is a presidential republic, okay? But he can be made so ineffective, he can be made irrelevant, all right? And that's what the Yellow Vests are doing. They're saying, we're not a political party, we're not a trade union, we're not someone's pawn, we are the people, and it's a breath of fresh air, okay? Having said that, any forms of violence against property and people are unacceptable to us here, okay? Absolutely. But a legitimate political activism and getting your voice out, I applaud it 100%. This neoliberal order is toxic. Listen to the people. They're saying it all around the world.
Yes. Alexander, on that point, do you think there's a chance that the Yellow Vest movement will connect with other movements like the Red Pen Teachers movement or other workers' movements across Europe?
Well, we've discussed this before. At the moment, it is very much a French movement, but there is no question at all that people do watch this. And I come back to something which we've said in videos, and I think on live chats before. Certainly, people in Germany follow this, and there's a lot of discontent in Germany. People have a misconception about Germany. I think they all imagine that this is an enormously strong and prosperous country. In some ways it is, but real wages have been screwed down in Germany for a long time. And the reason the German economy is as competitive as it is, despite the fact that investment in Germany has been falling or has been stagnant for a long time, is because labor costs have been held down, and that is causing quite a lot of discontent there. But I think the other place that one really needs to look at very carefully is Britain. Now, Britain and France are two terrible twins in some ways. They are constantly fighting each other. They've had long histories of war with each other. They also know each other very well. It's two societies that have a very long history of very strong interconnections. And there's no doubt at all, to my mind, I've no doubt of it, a lot of people in Britain are following the events in France very carefully, more so probably than you realize through the media. I mean, you get people from Britain, they regularly travel to France. There's lots of French people here in Britain also. People talk to each other. They have social connections. There are people, lorry drivers, truck drivers, business people who move backwards and forwards across France. And I am absolutely sure that if you go to places in Britain, you will find people talking about what's going on in France, with the political situation in Britain very bad at the moment, with Brexit and all that, and a political class that seems so out of touch. Yeah. I think that the potential for protests of something similar, not perhaps the same, I mean, it's a different political culture in Britain, but, things could happen in Britain. And I remember very well how in the run-up to the 2001 election in Britain, you saw people protesting outside, and not very large numbers of people, they were protesting outside oil refineries and all those sort of places, and that stopped the entire British economy in its tracks because it couldn't function without oil. So people who say that there is no history of protests like this in Britain are simply wrong.
Well, leaving Britain aside here, if we just stay with the continent, I would suggest the Yellow Vest movement, they do not integrate themselves with other movements similar in other countries. I think it should be stayed national and within the sovereignty of each country, because I think that's one of the points of this movement here. Now, certainly emulating them would be fine. What I always worry about when you look at the history of social movements, they get to a certain catalyst where then you have people that invade it, who corrupt it. You have people that subvert it, people that turn it into bureaucracies. They turn it into a business. They turn it into a career, and basically replicate what we have now with this neoliberal order. So I would say to the Yellow Vests, stay nimble, continue to articulate your grievances, be hesitant for immediate answers. I think because it's such a diffuse group of people, that's its strength right now, and you have to find a way to keep interest articulation fluid and people communicating with each other, because it's a movement, it's not a party, okay? It's more powerful as a movement, and I would suggest that others in Europe emulate that, but within national borders. Doesn't mean they can't talk to each other. That's good to talk to each other, but keep it as a national thing, because this is, I think, what people are, we have to understand, the neoliberal ideology is to crush the nation state, okay? So don't let that virus into this social movement.
Peter, can I just say, Peter's absolutely right about this. I mean, the whole point about the strength of the Yellow Vests is that it is a French movement responding to the situation in France and articulating French grievances.
Right.
If it tries to organize itself and become a sort of European or pan-European, then it is falling straight into a trap, and it will disintegrate. What I was talking about was not integrating with it in places like Britain and Germany. It is, to use Peter's word, emulating it. That is exactly right.
Peter, we have a super chat from MG. Just past the Chinese New Year here in Shanghai, do you think China caved in a bit to Trump? Parentheses, not the U.S. caved in to Trump.
This is not over yet. This is a long march, as one great politician said once. No, I don't think that the Chinese caved. I think there's going to be a lot more going on. This is going to be a lot more complicated than Trump thinks. Having said that, I think it's a very good, refreshing idea that the trade relations be examined very carefully. Trade is supposed to benefit both sides. Okay, that's okay with me as well. But the Chinese haven't faced this from the United States, and it's going to be a very good learning process for them as well, because these type of disagreements and trade quarrels are going to only get worse. So it's better to be more nimble in your game, because the U.S. has a lot of assets, but so do the Chinese, and that's what the Americans are learning about. I mean, it's hard to convince Americans to treat other people with equality and respect, and certainly the Americans don't see that in their interlocutors with the Chinese. I mean, again, we always go back to the media. Look, from CNN all the way to Fox, this constant demonization of China. And that doesn't help. And demonization is not a policy, okay? It doesn't get you anywhere, all right? I think this is a good thing that's going on. It'll make the Chinese more nimble in their trading practices. And I think it can be a win-win. But still, remember, everyone, the trade imbalance, okay, it might go down 3%, and Trump will say, I won, okay? He'll be like a Roman, just declare victory and go home, okay? But the trade deficit is there. It's going to be there for a long, long time because American politicians and industries screwed the middle class, okay? And that is not going to be resolved for a very long time, irrespective of what Trump says about it, all right? The damage is severe in the industrial heartland of the United States, and that's going to take a very long. Is it possible to bring it back? Yeah, I suppose, but everyone is going to have a better piece of the pie, and people. I'll probably get jumped on for saying this, but when you look at the major industries of Russia, before they make a big decisions, they consult with the Kremlin and say, is this good for the country, good for the people? That was the deal that Putin made with the oligarchs when he came to power. Stay out of politics, pay your taxes, okay? And give something back, okay? Like build some schools and kindergartens and hospitals and elderly care. Give something back. I think that's a good idea, okay? And that's redistribution in a positive way, all right? Because the income disparities in the Western world are getting grotesque. We already talked about the Yellow Vest movement. I rest my case.
All right, Alexander, do you want to comment on that, or do you want to move on to Brexit?
Well, I will comment. I will comment on this, actually, which is that I think it reflects very much what Peter is saying. This is a very complex trade negotiation that is going on between the Chinese and the US. It is entirely legitimate, as Peter correctly says, that the United States would want to revisit that and would want to discuss about this. But I am already concerned when people talk about China caving or the US caving. No. It makes it look like exactly this is some sort of power play. It is not a power play. It ought to be a movement towards a mutually acceptable and mutually beneficial position. Exactly. That is what trade negotiations are supposed to be about. And can I say something? I was really rather troubled to read an article on the American Conservative, which we provided a link to, in which he talked about a former Trump administration aide saying that the intention of the United States is to crush China. That was the word. That was the word that was used in that article. If that is the objective here, that is not. This is not a trade negotiation, and that trade negotiation will, in that case, fail. And if the United States actually thinks that because it has a deficit with China, that somehow puts it in a stronger position in negotiations with China over the long term, then it is miscalculating very, very badly indeed. Either this is a negotiation, a trade negotiation, in which case it will succeed, and we should put aside all talk of caving and all that nonsense, or it is a power play, in which case it will fail.
Well, I mean, if the U.S.'s aim is to crush the Chinese, they'll crush themselves in the process. I mean, no one's going to win from that. No one will win.
No one. Exactly.
All right, Peter, we have a super chat from Beatrix, and she wants the John Laughlin article. I found it here. Is the article Moral Disgrace EU Parliament Lectures the World on Rule of Law, Peter? Is that the article you were referring to? All right, I will place that link in the live chat. Thank you, Beatrix. It's coming up soon, that link, that article.
Thanks, Beatrix. I see you visiting us a lot. Thank you very much.
All right. Alexander, we have a super chat before you get to Brexit. What about Tulsi Gabbard's anti-war, anti-elitist message being under attack by the media? I'm sure both of you have a lot to say about this one. He says, I attended her announcement. Tulsi Gabbard is really getting crushed on mainstream media for her. Yeah, it's terrible for her anti-interventionist, anti-war stance.
Well, and being crushed in a completely predictable way, and by the same people who have been orchestrating the same campaign against Donald Trump. And it's become very clear to me that this is, in some ways, what these people want. They will attack anybody who wants to slow down this whole war bandwagon that they all seem to be committed to, and they will attack it in the same way. Attack that person in the same way. So Donald Trump, who is right-wing, is a puppet of Putin. It turns out that Tulsi Gabbard, who is very left-wing and probably wouldn't give Donald Trump the time of day, she also is a puppet of Putin. I mean, it is a disaster for the United States that these sort of things are happening. It is very predictable. It is very bad. I think Peter is probably going to want to say a lot about this. So over to you.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, empire is the glue that keeps the establishment in power. And the establishment are the major political parties. It's Wall Street, it's academia, and it's Hollywood media, okay? They're all in lockstep. So you get out of line, they get you from every side and hard. I don't agree with everything that she says, but she's a voice of reason on many specific issues that I like, okay? Syria, for example, is a perfect example, a perfectly reasonable position to take, but position that I think all three of us would support. But, you know, what they're doing now, it seems very clear to me, is they're doing it right now because they want to knock her out before the primary season. They don't want someone at the podium on national television talking about how the history of global interventions is an utter, complete, wasteful failure, okay? Because it is. They don't want her to be able to be on the podium and to contradict the cross-party line position on empire. So that's why they're doing it now. They want to make sure she doesn't even get to a caucus, let alone to the first primary in Iowa. Okay, they don't want that to happen. So that's their mission right now, is to just create a narrative that she's so toxic that she doesn't even want to show up. Or they're going through yearbooks. Okay, they're going through yearbooks now, trying to find a picture, trying to find something, some kind of statement. Okay, obviously she had a different position on the gay rights issue. She's come out there. They're going to keep making her come out and apologize, and then you'll say, look, this person just apologizes, and she apologizes for Putin. Okay, that's how they're doing it. Pretty simple to me. They don't want her to get into the first phase of the primary season.
I think that's exactly right. Can I just add one other thing about Tulsi Gabbard, which is that I'm not sure just how non-mainstream in some ways her views actually are. I mean, she served in the Middle East in the military. She was in Iraq. I think she has a fairly good understanding of the situation in Iraq and Syria. I'm not really convinced that on Russia she's really going to change policies to any radical degree.
Yeah.
So it's extraordinary to me how even this, I think, fairly mainstream politician in some ways on the left is now being subjected to these attacks, because on certain things she speaks sense, and it's very bad for the US when that happens.
You know, it just that the thing that she's speaking to a segment of the electorate that got Donald Trump elected. That's my opinion. I mean, what we've talked about this before, all right? And she's appealing to them, but that's not nearly enough to get you even knee deep into the primary season. Look, I mean, Ron Paul tried it, okay, in his presidential bid. Actually, he won the Iowa caucus. I remember it very, very clearly. It was reported that he was in second place. So what did the mass media do? They talked about who won who got first place and who got third place. They never talked about the Ron Paul the second. He got second most. And then when the votes were finally done and they'd moved off to New Hampshire, Ron Paul had actually won the primary. But that was in the rearview mirror and nobody talked about it. Okay.
Excellent.
And it was because he's a libertarian, obviously, but his anti-war credentials are sterling and everyone knows that. And that's why when he made his presidential bid, they ignored him. No media coverage. Though in 2016, CNN would just have live TV of an empty podium. No Donald Trump. Okay. See how the media works?
All right, Robert Francis, thank you for your super chat. We really appreciate it. And going back to the U.S.-China trade, I believe we have a super chat from Sean Ellis. Alexander, the trade deficit isn't the big deal if it's the $600 billion a year in IP theft. Why won't you tell the whole story? So what do you make about the U.S.-China IP theft? This actually connects to QY and all that stuff going on as well.
I mean, can I say straight away? I mean, I've come back to this. I'm not saying that the Chinese are entirely innocent of IP theft.
No, not either.
Nobody has ever said this. But to assume that this entire deficit is entirely because of that, or is even mainly because of that, is, I'm afraid, entirely and obviously wrong. It is because China has a very, very powerful manufacturing industry, more competitive in many sectors at this moment in time than that of the United States. So that the Chinese are able to produce goods, including things, for example, for American companies like Apple, which has factories in China, which it is cheaper for the United States, for those companies to make in China than it is in the United States. I think that kind of question, to my mind, points to the mistake some people in the United States are making in their dealings with China. I think that they imagine China to be much weaker and to have leveraged itself to a position that it doesn't deserve, then it actually, it's not as weak as they think, and it hasn't abused its position in the way they think. This is a strong power, a very strong power indeed. And if people continue to think in that way, I think they risk coming amiss very badly.
Okay, well, I think we can turn it upside down as well. And we've learned this from WikiLeaks. I mean, the U.S. uses its intelligence assets to spy on foreign competitors, all right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this whole mantra, IP theft. Yeah, I believe it, but don't you think the U.S. is using through the NSA? Oh, they come across a board meeting of the Venezuelan oil company. Don't you think they would pass that on to American oil companies? Oh, by the way, over lunch, I kind of overheard this. It works on all kinds of directions. Okay, I mean, Israel is America's one of its most important allies. Israel spies on the United States 24/7. All right, so don't just throw it at the Chinese. Okay, everybody does it. Some are better than others.
Peter's absolutely right, and I mean, I've had personal knowledge of this sort of thing. I mean, what used to be called rather quaintly industrial espionage, in other words, people stealing business secrets and technologies and all kinds of things. It goes on all the time. It goes on in Europe. It goes on in the United States. Countries do it to each other. We should be honest about this and accept that that is the real world. The Chinese have perhaps done it better than most, partly because in the 1980s and 90s, for geopolitical reasons, the United States wanted, encouraged them in a way, or made it possible.
Turned a blind eye.
Exactly, under blind eye. I mean, it benefited from it both geopolitically, because that made China strong at a time when the US had problems with the Soviet Union, with which China was on bad terms, and it also helped the US economy at that time, because Chinese exports kept inflation in the United States low and increased living standards. I mean, I remember a lot of this being said in the 1990s, but this is the real world. Espionage of this kind, IP theft, this is not unusual. And we should not overestimate either the importance of it in these trade negotiations, or make the mistake in thinking that that is the underlying problem that the United States and China have with each other.
Yeah. Obama was spying on Merkel. Don't we remember that?
Absolutely.
A couple of years, 3-4 years ago. So, I mean, everyone's spying on everyone.
Everybody's spying on everyone.
On a government level and on a company level as well. Alexander, a super chat from Afterglow. Alexander, what do you think about the complete media silence on the full integration of the UK military into the EU while saying nothing to Parliament or the electorate?
Well,
it's with France mostly, not
it's
the
with,
EU.
it's with, well, I was going to say, I mean, it's with France. And I mean, there has been some discussions about this. But I mean, one of the great problems with Britain at the moment is that because the whole Brexit debate has become so overwhelmingly dominant, it is taking out the oxygen out of practically every other issue. Now, I'm a British citizen. I have to say with some regret that the performance of the British military in recent wars has not been very good. They've had problems in Iraq. They've had problems in Afghanistan. The British have generally taken great pride in their military, but I don't think it's in particularly good shape at the moment. I think these attempts to try and integrate it with France, to achieve supposed economies with France, are not the way to sort out those problems. And at a time when the French, or at least the Macron government, seems intent on allying France ever closer to Germany and subordinating the French military to German interests, it seems to be for the British to become involved in all of that is even more misguided. So I agree entirely with the questioner. This ought to be something people talk about an awful lot more than they do. But the reality is in Britain at this moment in time that they're not talking about it. The entire debate is elsewhere.
I just wanted to agree with Alexander Mercouris, okay?
Yeah. All right. Sean Ellis says the super chat, the deficit and IP have zero to do with each other. All right. Thank you for that super chat. Alexander, what is going on with Brexit and the backstop? Is Theresa May going to cave to the EU and to Juncker?
Well, she may do. I mean, the point about Theresa May is whenever she goes off to the EU and negotiates with them, she ends up caving. So I wouldn't be at all surprised. I mean, I predict what's going to happen. We're supposed to have a debate. She's supposed to come back and put forward her revised deal around the 13th or 14th of February. I'm not convinced she will, by the way. But I suspect if she does, she will come up with exactly the same deal that she's presented before, the one that was overwhelmingly rejected just a few weeks ago by a majority of 230. It'll be the backstop as it's always been, and she will have come up perhaps possibly with some side letters or side words which, when analysed properly, mean very little and, legally speaking, mean absolutely nothing at all. I think Theresa May's strategy is what Jeremy Corbyn and several others say it is to dial down the clock. It is to scare everybody with stories about the terrible consequences of a no-deal Brexit. It is to close off all other options so that sometime, perhaps at the beginning or middle of March, when it really does look as if the choice is between her deal, as originally negotiated by her, or no deal, she can then strong-arm Parliament into voting for her deal. I think that is her strategy. I think that may also be the strategy of some people within the EU, assuming that they have a clear enough understanding of what is going on in Britain. Whether it will work will depend on two things: whether the Labour Party holds together in its opposition to this deal, and there's an awful lot of tensions in the Labour Party at the moment, and there's talk of a breakaway of 6 MPs breaking away from the Labour Party to form a pro-EU group. And it will also depend on whether the Brexiteers within the Conservative Party hold firm. The second, to my mind, is the more important, because I think that Theresa May will be very, very reluctant to proceed with a deal which a majority of Conservative backbench MPs, that is to say, MPs who are not ministers, who don't hold ministerial portfolios, what a majority of those reject. I think she will understand that if she does that, she will create a crisis within the Conservative Party, which could jeopardize not just its position in any future election, but its long-term hold on power. And I think that she doesn't want to be the Conservative leader and Prime Minister who puts the Conservative Party in that position. But this is a finely balanced thing, and we will see.
But Alexander, I'm curious, but it's never been about a real Brexit, a form of it, a strategy of it, an outcome of it. It's never been about Brexit. It's never been about the democratic decision of the electorate. It's always been about Theresa May and her Conservative Party. That's always been her top of mind.
Absolutely.
Just for what you said, okay?
No, you're absolutely right, Peter.
She's not a leader at all. She's an abysmal leader, okay? And she's always been thinking about the political calculations of her legacy and her party. And she is dead wrong. When have these people been right lately? When?
Well, Peter, you're absolutely right. I mean, the fundamental issue is that the political class in London has never really accepted the referendum outcome. They've never accepted it. Theresa May has not accepted it. So they have been constantly looking for ways around it. They I think, have grudgingly come to understand that Britain is going to have to leave the EU in some form, probably on the 29th of March. We did a video, Alex and I, in which I discussed that, and I pointed out that the recent votes in the House of Commons point in that direction. But instead of Theresa May as Prime Minister, when she became Prime Minister, working towards that objective, preparing Britain, preparing the country for the fact that it would leave the European Union. She has spent the last 2 years negotiating with the EU, that in a negotiation that is intended to keep Britain as much in the EU as possible. And that's been the fundamental problem. That is why we have the political crisis in Britain that we now have.
Future historians will ask, why in the world was the leader of the Conservative Party a known remainder tasked with negotiating Brexit? I mean, really, folks, absolutely. I mean, that's just a con job. That is a con job from beginning to end.
Well, that question, Peter, points to the fundamental problem in Britain. You have a population, which, especially in England, which let me remind our viewers, is the core territory of the United Kingdom. There was a big majority in England to leave the EU. Without the support of England, electors in England, there cannot be a viable government in London. Anyway, the big majority in England voted to leave the EU. The political class in Westminster overwhelmingly wanted to stay in the EU.
So
and
England,
that is the fundamental disjunction.
England left, but London remained.
Well, this is it, because that's exactly the point. And you have to also understand, when you read the British newspapers, that the British media, the BBC, most of the newspapers are overwhelmingly London-based. And they reflect the attitudes of London. And London, of course, voted Remain. The rest of England voted to leave. And there is this huge disjunction between attitudes in London, attitudes in Westminster, attitudes amongst the political elite in London, which is, of course, includes the media, and what popular opinion in England was.
Okay, Alex, 10 more minutes, okay?
I was just about to say we'll go on for another 10, 15 more minutes and we'll wrap it up. Super chat from Kirk. Finally got to listen to you guys live. Great program, and thanks for your perspectives. Thank you for that super chat, Kirk. And Peter, we have the State of the Union coming up. What are your thoughts? What should we be on the lookout? Trump's going to talk a lot about the wall. I'm sure the Democrats are going to do a lot of grandstanding. They're going to bring out a lot of theatrics. The whole United States and the whole world's going to be watching. What do you expect to see?
We always use the word gut around Donald Trump. I think this would be an opportunity for him to right the ship right now for him. The wall is going to be very, very important. He will shut down the government again. He has to. He's given himself no choice. He's backed himself into a corner. His feckless fellow members of the GOP had 2 years to take care of this. They failed. They failed the electorate. They failed the president. And now he's going to have to take some bold moves. So number one, the wall. Number two, I think he wants to reassert himself in the way that he wants to be perceived in the media. He has a lot of other people taking the limelight, particularly someone like John Bolton. He's going to discuss forced regime change in Venezuela. He's going to own it, and we'll see what the consequences are. But I think Donald Trump is going to want to reassert himself, and it will be the opening salvo of his re-election campaign. So, and of course, he's going to, we'll see what the theatrics are. I think he really wants to give it to Nancy and Chuck, and he's going to find a way to do it. Okay. Watch it, folks. I mean, the political class, they work against all of our interests. Okay. They do actively work against our interests, but they do one thing for us. They entertain us. So watch it for the entertainment value. Have a big bucket of popcorn.
Alexander, what do you think is going to happen? We have a super chat from American Rebel. Thank you, gentlemen. Always informative and thought-provoking. What do you make of the State of the Union address?
Well, I mean, we're going to see Donald Trump, I think, pitted against the Democrats in the House of Representatives and strongly appealing to his base. And I think he's going to use it for that platform. Yeah. I think he's going to go for Pelosi.
That's what he's good at. It's what he's good at. It's a strong suit.
I mean, and he's got some, quite strong cards to play. I mean, the U.S. economy has been strong. He can point to that. It's supposed to be a State of the Union address. He can talk about how strong the economy has been. He's also got to explain, I think, carefully his foreign policy positions, and at the same time, he's got to really plug his policies, which the House is obstructing. Now, Peter is a historian, and he will know that in 1948, Harry Truman won the presidency by running against Congress. I suspect that's exactly what Donald Trump is now going to start doing. He's going to run against the House of Representatives. He's going to say they're obstructing me at every turn. They're not cooperating with me. I've got this platform I want to do. They have nothing positive to offer except more of the same, which is what we saw before with Obama, what we rejected when you elected me. And I want to move forward with my agenda. And the way you do that is by electing me president again in 2020. So I think that's what he's going to be doing when he goes to the State of the Union shortly.
I think also it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with the Democrats and the left. Their perceived advantage, they think, in front of the electorate is diversity. Okay,
Yes.
Well, that is their Achilles heel as well. And I, maybe not Donald Trump specifically, but certainly the GOP are going to start taking some swipes at that, because diversity is inherently divisive, and they're going to demonstrate it. The Democrats are not. They're not in lockstep right now. The BDS bill that's going through the House of Representatives, that's a really contentious thing, because you have the old guard like Pelosi that are staunchly pro-Israel, and then you have the new guard that was just recently inaugurated, the Ocasio-Cortez people. They have a very, very different position, and so issues like that are going to be a real hot potato for them, and of course expect the GOP to take advantage of it. It's called politics.
I have a question for both you guys. I'm looking at the chat. This is an interesting question. Do you guys think that we underestimate the intelligence, the strategic thinking of Trump? Do you think there's a lot more strategy in what Trump does?
No, I've said this for me. I don't.
Yeah.
I take a different view. I think that Trump, maybe he's not exactly a calculating person, but I think he has a very shrewd idea of his base. And I think he understands very well how to appeal to his political and electoral base. He has a connection with them, which frankly I don't see any other US politician have at the moment. Where I think he has problems is not with his base and with mobilizing them and bringing them out. It is with running the government in the United States, because he has this huge problem that he doesn't really control the government properly. You've talked about the disastrous personnel appointments that he makes. We've talked about how he doesn't seem to be able to stick often to policies that he announces and see them through effectively. He's too easily swayed by bad advice. But in terms of his base, the people who elected him in 2016, he speaks their language. He understands them very well. He understands what they think. And I think he's not lost that touch at all. Whether it'll be enough to carry him through into 2020, we will see.
Peter, do you agree with that?
No, well, yes and no. I mean, obviously, he understands his base. He does speak their language. We have said this repeatedly, okay? Yes. The problem is enacting his agenda. And he makes too many compromises. He walks back things too quickly, too easily. He lets some people around him qualify him all of the time. And I'm speaking about foreign policy, Syria specifically. He says that he ran on a platform of against foreign interventions, but he tells the entire foreign policy community, and we did a video on this, that they're wrong about Iran. He has that Iran virus, okay, and it's totally in contradiction to what he wants to achieve. So I want a more organizing effect, all right, and Alexandria Kiris is absolutely right. Take control of that bureaucracy. Why did he let Jim Comey stay around for so long? Well, Rod Rosenstein. I mean, he with impunity. Okay, he doesn't have an AG. He doesn't even have a Secretary of Defense right now. No. I mean, he's running the government counter to his own gut and his own instinct for the people that voted for him. So, in that sense, he's a disaster. All right, I'm sorry to say that. Because I did not want to see, and I have to clarify this so many times, is that I did not want to see the criminal Clinton clique in power, and I supported many planks of Trump's campaign, and he's betraying them left and right. Let's be honest here, all right? And that's why I'm very disappointed. And with the openness and the gleefulness of regime change in Venezuela. But didn't you just say on your Twitter feed 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago? You need to have some consistency. And believe me, we all know this very, very well. The bureaucracy is maniacal, and they will do everything in their power to take you down, okay? As bad a rap Richard Nixon gets, he lied, he connived, he cover up. But he was a masterful politician on policy. He looked at the extremes and found how to find himself in the middle without betraying his base. He won every single state except for one, Massachusetts, in 1972. A masterful politician. He knew what he was doing. Trump needs to do the same. All right? I never want to see. I never want to see an American president fail. I did not want to see Barack Obama fail, as much as I disliked him. I don't hope for the worst. Okay, I look at it realistically based on what they said and what they said they would deliver. Okay, the guy's got to step up and start delivering again.
Yes, I think Peter's absolutely right. I mean, I'm going to make a personal observation. I think that Donald Trump really does need to search out people who are really going to support him. I mean, he can't run the government all by himself, which is what I sometimes get the sense that he's trying to do. I think he works far too many hours. I think he only gets 5 hours sleep a day. That is not a good way of running an organization as complicated as the US government is. Peter talked about Nixon. Nixon was a strange man, someone I didn't like. I remembered him, but at the end of the day, he did have a cadre of people around him who did what he wanted him to do. I mean, Kissinger, for example, you may think him an appalling man, but he was certainly effective, and he was effective carrying out Richard Nixon's policies. Exactly.
A real strategist.
And I think, exactly, and that is what Donald Trump needs to do. He needs to, as I said, try less to be the person in charge of everything, and he needs to start picking people whom he can trust to do what he wants. And I don't know how he picks these people or why he does so, but there are actually plenty of people out there, highly qualified people, who would work for him, if not perhaps in yeah.
He watches too much Fox News. That's how he got Bolton.
Well, exactly. I mean, he should look at the real realists, if I can put it like that. People who are certainly there, and certainly he has lost control of that key instrument of US policy, which is the National Security Council, which he has put entirely in Bolton's hands and which is running amok.
All right, let's wrap it up.
Abrams was a never Trumper during the campaign.
I agree.
And Trump doesn't know that. I bet he knows that. So what happened? Okay.
Maybe Russiagate. Maybe Russiagate. He got boxed in. Who knows? Peter, we'll wrap it up on this super chat, and it's from Penguins fan. Question for Peter: is the Democratic Party the party of slavery and racism? What do you think progressives like Thom Hartmann and Cenk Uygur say they switch sides? Not sure I understand the full question.
I understand the question. The question. I mean, and it's a good question. Okay, look, if you look at MSNBC and CNN, what do they do? It's a cycle after cycle. How if you don't agree with them, you're a racist, a bigot, and a sexist. Okay, that's exactly what they do. Okay, they don't report the news; they enforce a narrative. Now, the party of slavery is the Democratic Party. Remember it was about a year and a half ago, knocking down all the statues? Those were built by Democrats, not Republicans. Democrats built them, all right? They are the party of racism today. That's what they are, all right? And that's how they divide, conquer, diversity, equity. They play the race card all of the time, and it's destroying the country. Because the vast majority of Americans are not racist, not at all. You can live your whole life and never come across a Nazi. But according to CNN and MSNBC, they're around every single corner, and they're being paid by Vladimir Putin. Okay, the Democrats do not want to come to terms with their legacy. All right. Now, what happened with that Virginia governor it's despicable. I mean, in 1984, and you're in medical school and you're wearing blackface, or a Klan outfit, Well, that is just really distasteful. Should he resign over that? I don't know. It's up for the people of Virginia to decide that. But
they're upset about the yearbook picture, though, Peter. They're not upset about the fact that he said about killing kids.
Thank you. That's exactly my point.
Upside down. What kind of world are we living in?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Executing a newborn child, just as long as they're made comfortable. Okay. Where's the outrage about this culture of death? Okay. And you're worried about a stupid, ugly, disgusting prank. Let the people of Virginia decide his fate, my opinion. But someone like that went way over the line. It shows me the country is going down the worst of all possible paths because the liberal media didn't want to talk about that story. Death of infants. That's what it's got down to.
Alexander, any comments?
Well, I'm not perhaps quite as expert in this field as Peter is, because I mean, but if you're talking about the Democrats, yes, they were the party of slavery in the 1860s. That's a long time ago, but of course, the Democratic Party dominated Southern politics.
They were the party of Jim Crow as well, all the way to the 1960s.
All the way to the 1960s, and I mean, the way in which they sort of reverse themselves on these things is extraordinary. And I have to say, and I agree with Peter about this, I mean, identity politics, which has become the default position of the Democratic Party, which shows a continued obsession with racial questions long after the Civil Rights Act and all of these things have been passed, it seems to me is extremely damaging, when the United States should really be looking at economic questions and its foreign policy, its infrastructure, and these sort of things. This constant play of victimization, this idea that, people can be divided. You create a coalition of victims, basically, or people you say are victims. It isn't helping. It isn't addressing the underlying problems of the United States, which go far beyond those issues. I'm not saying that there aren't problems with people, black people being arrested and maltreated by the police or whatever, but government in Washington needs to look at the big picture, and that big picture is being lost because of this focus on these other things.
Yeah, and the Democrats are doubling down. I mean, I forgot her name. She ran for the Georgia governorship. She lost, but she wrote an op-ed, Peter Alexander, where she said intersectional politics is the future for the Democrat Party. I think it was Owens, Cheryl Owens, or
no.
I forgot her name. Yeah.
What's the last thing? Because I really got to run.
Yeah.
No. If you lose a vote, it's because of racism. Okay, that's it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, indeed, and as I said, I mean, we've just been discussing recently, Alex and I, about problems of the United States, and we were talking about the dysfunctional nature of the political system and how that's failing to address problems which this mighty economy, the United States is a mighty economy, has and which could be coped with. And the reason it's not doing it is, as I said, because we hear nonsense like that about how sexual politics is the future. It's not the future. Economics is always what a government needs to focus on. Infrastructure is what it needs to focus on. Education is what it needs to focus on. Healthcare is what it needs to focus on. Sexual politics is a side issue. It always was, and it still is. It may be important for some people, but you cannot build a successful economic and political system if you move these issues, which are side issues, to the center. And that is where, in my opinion, the problems with the United States start.
All right, and we'll wrap it up there.
To be continued.
To be continued. It's a big topic. Peter, what are you looking at this week coming ahead? Real quick,
because I'm doing 2 programs on foreign policy, and I'm going to roast John Bolton. So everybody watch Crosstalk on Wednesday.
All right, a John Bolton roast. Got to love that. I'll be tuning into that one. Alexander, what are you looking at?
Well, first of all, Venezuela. You have to look at Venezuela because, as I said, we still don't really know exactly what's going on there. But I think that by this time next week, when we have our next live, we should have a clearer picture of where this is going. So Venezuela, obviously, I have to follow Brexit There's talk here in Britain about the Labour Party splitting. I don't really believe it, but we'll see what happens. And I think the other things that are happening in this world, the Middle East, always we have to follow there. And of course, there is the growing crisis, economic crisis in Europe. People have been talking about problems, economic problems. In the US, they've been talking about economic problems. In China, I don't really see these problems as being as big as people say. The real economic problems are in Europe, which is probably now in recession. And this is coming at a time when the political situation in Europe, we talked about France, we haven't really talked about Germany, but Britain also. It's very bad. So already have a bad political situation there, and we're going to have an economic crisis, or at least a recession on top of it.
Yeah.
So I think we have to follow that over the next couple of days.
And Trump just tweeted, okay, see you guys next week.
All right. From Moscow, host of RT's Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle, thank you very much. In London, the Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander McCurse, thank you very much, guys. Thank you for your super chats. Check out the Duran shop, PayPal, Patreon, donate to us. It helps out a lot. Share the channel with everyone. Smash that like button. Share the channel on Facebook, on Twitter, Minds, Gab, where else? All the social media. Get the word out about the Duran. I hope you guys have a really, really good Monday and a good week. Stay tuned for more videos coming out. Take care, everybody. Have a good night. Have a good morning. Have a good afternoon.